"Find another seat." The voice cracked like a slap across the terminal. Loud, dismissive, laced with contempt. Brian Pierce froze. His hand hovered just above the chair where his small duffel bag had been resting a moment ago, now shoved aside on the floor. In the seat sat a younger man, sunglasses on indoors, arms folded like he owned the row. "I said move," the man snapped again, louder now. "You're not sitting here, old man. Go sit somewhere else." The quiet hum of the waiting area died into a hush. A child's juice box slipped from his hand. A flight attendant near the desk paused mid-sentence, gaze drifting toward the scene. The room seemed to hold its breath. Brian stood silent, blinking behind the lenses of his thick glasses. His jacket, old, brown, worn smooth at the edges, bore the soft gleam of a single American flag pin. His cane, leaning against the chair beside him, shook slightly where it touched the floor. He opened his mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to ask again, but no words came. The man in the sunglasses leaned back, smirking. "You're lucky we let you board at all." The air shifted. From a row just behind them, boots scraped the floor, the slow, deliberate sound of men rising. One, then another, then three more. 5 Marines. Silent, steady. They stood like statues behind the seated man, not saying a word, not yet. But something had changed, and the whole gate felt it. If you believe every veteran deserves respect, subscribe, because every view helps this message reach those who need it most. Earlier on that morning, light filtered through worn curtains as Brian Pierce sat on the edge of his twin bed, hands resting on his knees. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that settled not just in the walls, but in the bones. On the opposite side of the room, a dresser stood neatly adorned, a folded American flag in a triangular case, a tarnished wristwatch that no longer ticked, and a framed photo of 3 young men in olive drab, all smiling as if they hadn't yet learned the weight of war. He rose slowly, joints stiff from years and weather and memory. The house was modest, with creaking floorboards and fading wallpaper, but it was tidy, a reflection of the man who lived there. In the hallway, he passed the calendar where today's date had been circled for weeks. Flight to Raleigh, 8:20 a.m. Below it, a note written in a granddaughter's hand read, "We love you, Grandpa B." He made his bed with the same methodical care he had once used in the barracks. No wrinkles. Corners tucked tight. The same practiced discipline he'd carried through battle and peace alike. In the kitchen, he brewed black coffee and buttered a slice of toast. He didn't eat much in the morning anymore, not since his wife passed, but the routine mattered. The sound of the percolator, the scent of scorched crumbs, the clink of a spoon in a mug. These were anchors in a drifting world. The suitcase was packed the night before. A pressed white shirt, a navy tie, the soft navy cardigan his daughter once gave him, and a photograph of Lewis Henley, the young man whose memorial he was flying to attend. Louis had been barely 19 when they served together, a farm kid from outside Asheville. The two had shared foxholes and firelight and fear, and Brian had promised, all those years ago, that if the worst ever happened, he'd stand in Louis's place when it mattered. Today was that day. He dressed deliberately. Tan slacks, the brown jacket with the fraying elbow seam, the flat cap he'd worn since his retirement. On the inside lining of the jacket, he pinned a small insignia, the crossed bayonets of the United States Army 7th Infantry Division. His hand lingered there for a beat, pressing gently. At the airport, things moved faster than he did. The automatic doors whooshed open into a crowd of movement. People walked while staring at screens. Wheels clattered on tile. Voices rose and fell like waves. Brian stepped forward cautiously, adjusting the strap of his carry-on. The line at the cafe was long. He waited quietly, smiling once at a toddler who pointed at his cap. The barista barely glanced up when it was his turn. "Small black coffee, please," Brian said. She tapped the register impatiently. He reached into his wallet, slow fingers pulling out bills, and then paused, counting change. The sigh from her was audible, not loud, but deliberate. He offered a sheepish smile. "Sorry, these old fingers." "No problem," she said without meaning it. He shuffled to a seat near the window, sipping quietly. The coffee was bitter. At security, the tray moved before he was ready. The Transportation Security Administration agent, young and tight-lipped, waved him through. "Shoes off," he said sharply. Brian bent slowly, struggling with the laces. His hands didn't grip like they used to. "Come on, let's go. Others are waiting." He said nothing, just nodded. His socks stuck slightly to the floor as he passed through the scanner. His belt beeped. They had to run it twice. Near gate C12, he paused to rest. Mothers with strollers passed him. Teenagers laughed too loudly. A mother whispered to her child, "What's he all dressed up for?" Brian heard, but he didn't react. He simply moved toward the row of chairs near the windows, placing his small bag on the empty seat to his left. It was a gentle claim, the kind of silent language of travel everyone understood. He stood up again, moving slowly toward the gate agent to ask about early boarding. Behind him, he didn't see the man who approached, didn't hear the shuffle of the bag being moved, but he would feel the weight of that act, not just in the body, but in memory. Because when he turned back, the seat was no longer his, and the man who had taken it would soon understand something that could never be taught in classrooms or boardrooms. Something deeper. The clatter of rolling luggage and the low drone of boarding announcements filled the terminal. Gate C12 buzzed with quiet anticipation. Families murmuring, phones chirping, a toddler squealing in delight near the window where airplanes lumbered slowly into view. Brian Pierce returned to the waiting area with deliberate steps. His carry-on, an old canvas bag patched at the seams, had been set neatly beneath the seat where he'd been resting moments earlier, a silent marker of presence and intent, the sort of unwritten code travelers still abided by. But the seat was no longer empty. A man, trim suit, mirrored sunglasses still on indoors, legs crossed, sat there now, back straight and arms folded. Brian paused, surprised. He glanced down. His bag had been moved to the side, propped awkwardly near the trash bin. "Excuse me," Brian said, voice low but clear. "I believe you may be in my seat. I stepped away for just a moment." The man didn't even lift his eyes. "Find another seat," he said, brushing a non-existent speck from his cuff. Brian blinked. "Sir, I was sitting there just—" The man snapped. "You snooze, you lose, old man." Heads turned. A mother stilled her child mid-step. The gentle hum of conversation around them seemed to dip, as if the very air paused. Brian stood still, his fingers tightening around the handle of his carry-on. His knuckles whitened. "I'm not asking much," he said softly. "Just the seat I was using. My bag was—" Scott Morgan looked up now, the smile slow and sarcastic. "What, are we playing musical chairs now?" He laughed, not with humor, but sharp condescension. "You want a seat? Go buy one in first class." His voice carried, crisp and without care. A few travelers looked away. A man near the window adjusted his headphones. The security agent near the boarding gate turned, saw the exchange, but didn't move. Brian didn't argue. He simply stood, breath shallow, the hum of the airport pressing in. He adjusted his coat. The pin on his lapel caught a gleam of the terminal lights, the insignia of the United States Army 7th Infantry, barely noticed, certainly unacknowledged. A woman across the aisle stood quietly. She looked to be in her 20s, nervous, but kind-eyed. "Sir," she said gently, "you can take mine." Brian turned toward her, lips parting to offer gratitude, but Scott Morgan raised a hand, blocking the moment. "He can stand," he said coldly. "Builds character." There was a silence, sharp, stinging. The woman hesitated, then sat back down, flustered. Brian gave her a small nod. No resentment, just weariness. He remained standing. A uniformed staff member walked by. Brian raised a hand. "I marked that seat with my bag," he said. "It was taken while I—" The staff member cut him off. "If someone's already sitting, I can't ask them to move unless it's a safety issue." His tone was mechanical, dismissive. Brian looked down. The veins on his hand bulged with quiet pressure. His suitcase strap creaked in his grip. "I see," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. A boy nearby tugged on his father's jacket. "Why is that man yelling at Grandpa?" The father didn't respond, just picked up his phone, pretended not to hear. Scott Morgan leaned back, headphones slipping over his ears again, his mouth curved in a smug line. He didn't say another word. He didn't have to. Brian remained still. He didn't shout, didn't plead, but something shifted in his shoulders, a weight drawn inward, like an old coat against sudden cold. His gaze drifted not toward the aggressor, but down, to the scuffed floor, to the worn tips of his shoes, to the bag that had once marked his place. He didn't feel humiliated. He felt displaced again. And then, almost involuntarily, his fingers brushed the edge of the old canvas handle, and the memory stirred. Not a thought, but a sound first. The sudden thud of mortar shells, the sharp crack of gunfire in frozen air, the echo of a scream, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in decades. The airport dissolved around him, just for a moment. The metal seats and polished tiles faded. In their place, mud, smoke, a body crumpled in the snow. A tremor ran through Brian's arm, and without another word, without a sound, he closed his eyes and remembered. The rain had not let up in hours. It came down in sharp, frigid needles that flattened the grass and soaked every inch of fabric, seeping through the seams of boots and gloves. The Korean peninsula in winter was no place for comfort, and that morning in 1965, it was especially cruel. Brian Pierce was 20 years old then, lean, sharp-eyed, and still learning how to swallow fear. His breath curled in white wisps against the gunmetal sky as he crouched behind a sandbag wall, rifle balanced across his knees. The wind carried the metallic stench of gunpowder, mixed with something bitter and coppery from the last barrage. He didn't speak. None of them did. They just waited. An explosion cracked through the distant hills. Then another, closer. The ground shook. Dirt scattered across Brian's helmet. He looked up and saw a runner, a figure darting from the far trench line. It was Private Lewis Henley, one of the newer boys, barely out of high school. Wide-eyed, too fast, too green. Henley was yelling something, waving toward a downed man halfway between the lines. A corporal, chest bleeding, legs twisted. No one moved. The snipers had the kill zone covered, and stepping out meant suicide. But Brian didn't pause. He gritted his jaw, slammed his rifle to his chest, and vaulted over the wall. His boots landed hard in the muck, water splashing up to his thighs. Bullets kicked dirt beside him as he ran low, weaving between broken earth and broken bodies. He didn't look back. He didn't look up, only forward, to the wounded man groaning, hand twitching toward the sky. He reached him, dropped to his knees, and dragged him toward the ditch line by the straps of his gear. 10 yards, then 15. His shoulders burned. A shot ripped through the collar of his coat. He kept pulling. A scream to the left. Henley had joined him. Fool boy, brave boy. They reached the edge just as another mortar hit behind them. The ground lifted. Dirt filled Brian's mouth. He covered Henley with his own body, felt the force hammer his spine. Then silence. The kind of silence that isn't real. The kind that means the world is still deciding who gets to live. Later, in the medic tent, Henley's face was pale under a blood-soaked bandage. Brian sat beside him, cradling a cracked canteen in his hand. He didn't speak. He just stared at the flicker of a single lantern swaying with the wind. Henley opened his eyes. His voice was thin. "You didn't even know me. Why'd you do it?" Brian looked down. His voice was rough, barely audible. "Because someone did it for me." That was the truth. Back in '62, he'd nearly bled out on a hill outside Panmunjom until an older sergeant had dragged him 300 yards under fire. That man didn't make it. Brian had never forgotten. He never would. Outside the tent, snow began to fall, quiet, soft, indifferent to the war. And inside, under the dim glow of flickering light, Something sacred passed from one soldier to another, something not written in orders or medals. A code, a promise, a weight carried forward. The airport noise had returned, announcements overhead, the soft rumble of suitcase wheels, the occasional ringtone. But around gate C12, something had changed. Brian Pierce stood motionless, eyes still carrying the frost of a memory decades old. The room spun around him, not from dizziness, but from the aching press of silence within. He hadn't noticed the man watching from 4 rows back, hadn't seen the quiet tension simmering in that posture. But now, others had. The Marine stood. He was tall, his head shaved to a fine stubble, his jaw rigid, unmoving. There was no ceremony in his movement, only intent. He stepped forward slowly, boots landing with a quiet thud on the terminal floor. No rush, no show. "Sir," he said. Brian looked up. The voice was young, but the eyes behind it were old. Old in a way that only those who'd seen blood and dust and death in silence could be. "Would you like my seat?" the Marine asked, low and steady. Brian opened his mouth, shaking his head gently. "I'm all right," he began. But the Marine didn't step back. He simply gave a small nod, not forceful, not pushy, just a gesture that said, "This isn't about ease. This is about something else." Across the aisle, another Marine rose, then another. Their uniforms varied, some civilian hoodies, some with faint insignia still stitched to the sleeve, but their alignment was unmistakable. 3 men, then 4, and then 5. One of them adjusted his collar, revealing the faint edge of a Semper Fidelis tattoo. The others flanked slowly, not in confrontation, but in quiet formation. Not a threat, but a wall. They walked together, the hum of the terminal falling away as they moved, toward Brian, past him, then circling back. One turned toward Scott Morgan, still seated, arms folded now, defiant. The Marine's voice didn't rise. He didn't puff out his chest. He just said, "Sir, that seat was reserved." Scott blinked. The grin cracked across his mouth like drying paint. He laughed, but the sound was hollow, brittle. "What, you 5 gonna surround me over a chair?" He stood slightly, spreading his arms. "Really? This what you're doing now? You people bored?" The air held. The first Marine didn't move. His eyes didn't flinch. Another stepped forward, younger, leaner, freckles across his face. His voice was quieter, but carried more weight than the one before. That seat belonged to a man who wore the flag before any of us knew what it meant. Someone in the row behind them slowly pulled out a phone. Scott scoffed. "God, you people and your little drama stunts." But no one else laughed. A gate attendant, nervous now, leaned over her desk. Her fingers moved to her radio, quietly, discreetly. "Control, we've got a situation developing. Gate C12, multiple witnesses, requesting supervisor presence." She didn't say it loudly. She didn't need to. The way her hand hovered over the mic told the story. Near the window, an older man, long retired judging by his blazer and silver pins, stood and removed his cap. He didn't speak. He just watched. Scott looked around, and for the first time, the confidence in his shoulders faltered. "This is insane," he muttered, grabbing his bag roughly from beneath the seat. "I didn't do anything illegal. You all acting like I slapped a baby." The Marines didn't respond. Not one. Their silence was not empty. It was filled with everything Scott Morgan didn't understand. Brian still stood quietly beside them, not speaking, not gesturing. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't demanded attention, and yet, somehow, the world had turned its gaze toward him. The Marine who'd first spoken didn't move until Scott had taken 3 slow steps away, and even then, he did not speak. He just turned, looked to Brian, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. Brian met his eyes. Something passed between them. Not words, not even gratitude, just a shared understanding, the kind forged under foreign skies. And as the gate announcement resumed, Flight number, boarding group, final call. The 5 Marines stepped back into their row. No chest beating, no fanfare, just men returning to silence. But everything had shifted. A woman near the water fountain whispered to her son, "That's why we honor them. That's why." And a quiet ripple moved through the terminal. Scott Morgan walked away briskly, but not before glancing over his shoulder. Once, then twice, as if still unsure whether he had just been shamed or saved. He disappeared past the row of vending machines near the terminal exit, muttering, tugging his carry-on behind him like a child denied his turn at a toy. The air left in his wake was strangely still. The gate agent hadn't resumed announcements. No one rushed to check their boarding passes. The usual bustle and drone had given way to something quieter, a strange hush that clung to every pair of watching eyes. Brian Pierce, for the first time in minutes, exhaled fully. The breath had sat in his chest like a stone, solid, unmoved, as if afraid to disturb the moment. He reached slowly for the handle of his small bag, still upright where he had placed it earlier. One of the Marines, the one with the freckled face, stepped forward and gently placed a hand over the handle. "Allow me, sir," he said softly, already lifting it. Brian nodded once. The gesture was stiff, not from pride, but the kind of ache that settles in bones after too many winters. He moved toward the now empty seat, not hurried, not dazed, but with the same deliberate dignity he had shown since arriving. Each step quiet, measured, not needing to prove anything. A flight attendant appeared beside him, a small bottle of water in hand. Her voice trembled just slightly as she spoke. "Sir, please, take your time. We'll wait." She didn't mean the flight. He took the seat gently, not as if reclaiming a throne, but returning to something already earned. His spine remained straight, cap untouched. His eyes scanned the rows ahead. Still many faces, still many watching. A child to the left clapped first. Just a single clap, too sharp in the silence. His mother flinched, but then another joined. Then a third. No one led it. There was no standing ovation, no cue. Just slow, respectful applause. Some bowed their heads, some placed hands over hearts. Some didn't move at all, but their eyes did. The applause didn't rise in volume. It never became thunder. It stayed soft, gentle, reverent. Brian sat with his hands on his knees, eyes focused on the far wall. He didn't nod, didn't smile, but his eyes glistened. Not with tears, not quite, but with a quiet kind of recognition, like hearing an old friend's name after decades. The Marines returned to their seats without ceremony. One of them, the tallest, remained standing a moment longer. His posture wasn't rigid, just intentional, as if holding the space open, making sure no one forgot what had just happened. He looked to Brian, then offered a sharp, precise nod. Not a salute. Not here. Brian returned it. A small gesture, no less sacred. A gate supervisor approached, her headset still coiled around her shoulder. "Sir," she said carefully, "you're welcome to pre-board now. We'll hold the gate until you're settled." He rose again, but this time it wasn't with the weight of being displaced. This time, it was with the quiet gravity of being seen. As he passed by, a man with a veteran's patch on his vest rose and adjusted his cap. An older woman in line placed her hand on her chest. The entire terminal didn't change, but for those watching, something inside them did. The waiting area had long since emptied of its initial tension, but its silence remained. The memory of what had just unfolded settled into the fabric of the terminal. In the walls, the chairs, the hush that came after the echo. By midday, a bystander's recording had already found its way online. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just steady hands capturing stillness, principle, and the quiet rise of respect. No shouting, no violence, just 5 Marines standing firm. The video spread faster than anyone expected. First to local forums, then picked up by a regional news station. Within 24 hours, the headline floated across millions of screens. He took the old soldier's seat and found himself surrounded by honor. In response, the airport's administration issued a rare midday press statement. They acknowledged the failure in protocol, noting that seating etiquette and traveler respect were critical, especially concerning elderly passengers and those in military dress. New signage appeared a week later across all terminals. Reserved priority seating for veterans and senior travelers. Thank you for your service. Behind closed doors, airline representatives initiated quiet policy changes. Security and gate staff received new training modules, focused specifically on the dignified handling of veterans, elderly travelers, and those in visible uniform or memorial attire. It wasn't flashy, no headlines announced it, but it was real. Scott Morgan, the man whose arrogance sparked it all, found himself under scrutiny. He hadn't spoken to the press. His name was never printed, but those in certain circles, corporate clients, frequent flyer networks, began whispering. Within a month, he was removed from a travel perks program. The language was clinical, due to disruptive behavior not in accordance with customer policy. He had tried to appeal the decision, called it a misunderstanding, claimed the Marines had intimidated him, but no one seemed to listen. Not anymore. As for Brian Pierce, he received a letter just 4 days after his return to Bakersfield. A formal invitation from the Veterans of Foreign Wars National Committee. They wanted him to attend a fall gathering in Washington, not as a speaker, necessarily, but as a guest of honor. Someone had seen the video. Someone had read about North Carolina. And someone had remembered. Enclosed with the letter was a photograph, still frame from the footage. Brian standing beside the now empty seat. A Marine nodding toward him. The entire terminal caught mid-applause. There was a soft golden filter on the moment, as though time had slowed long enough to capture a truth long forgotten. Dignity never ages. It only waits to be seen again. The North Carolina sun was softer now, leaning toward afternoon. Its warmth stretched thin through the trees, brushing the tops of the grave markers like a silent blessing. Gravel crunched under slow footsteps as Brian made his way between rows of white stones, each standing like a word in a language only he still spoke. In his left hand, a single bloom, pale blue, the color of forget-me-nots. In his right, his cap, held low and close. No words passed his lips as he walked. Only the wind spoke now, carrying the scent of earth and pine, and something older still, the breath of time itself. He stopped before a modest headstone, clean, upright, unadorned. It read, Private Louis Henley, 1946-1965, United States Army. He stood for another, and so they stood for him. Brian knelt slowly. His knees creaked with age, but he made no sound. He placed the flower at the base of the stone, smoothing the soil with the edge of his hand. Then, with a hand that had once gripped rifle stock and shaken with fire, he touched the carved name with his fingers, tracing each letter like prayer beads. They remembered, Lou, he whispered, even when I thought they wouldn't. They stood. His voice cracked, caught between relief and the long ache of years. They saw an old man, but then they saw the rest. A pause. They always do, in the end. From somewhere beyond the hill, a trumpet played. Not close, not clear, but enough. A melody known to many but understood by few. It lingered like breath on a cold morning. Real or imagined, it didn't matter. It was heard. Brian stood again, a little straighter than before. His cap found its place over silver hair. He turned from the stone and walked slowly down the path, his shadow long behind him. His heart no longer bent forward under the weight of being unseen. Somewhere behind him, the trees stirred, not with wind, with memory. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor and kindness. Let us know where you're watching from, and if this moment brought back memories you carry with you. The best way to honor their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another untold chapter of courage and sacrifice.